The last bell of the year rang without a bell at all. It came as a hush, the sort that settles when snow finally stops falling and the world realizes it has been holding its breath. In that hush, beneath a sky stitched with pale stars, a small cottage at the edge of the bramblewood breathed out warm light through its windows, and on the stone sill sat a cat who knew, with absolute certainty, that something was about to change. His name was Rowan. Rowan was a cat of deliberate movements and ancient thoughts, the kind of cat who seemed to have been born already remembering things. His fur was the color of toasted oats with darker stripes like brushstrokes, and his eyes were green in the way moss is green, deep, patient, alive. He wrapped his tail neatly around his paws and listened to the quiet, because quiet always spoke first on nights like this. Inside the cottage, the hearth popped softly. Outside, frost traced lace along the hedges. Rowan flicked one ear as the wind shifted, carrying the scent of wood smoke, dried oranges, and the faint sweetness of honeyed tea. New Year's Eve, then. Humans gave it many names, but Rowan understood it simply as a turning, an invisible hinge the world passed through while pretending nothing had moved at all. He hopped down from the sill and padded inside. The cottage welcomed him the way it always did, with warmth pooling low along the floorboards and the familiar creak of old wood stretching its joints. Bundles of herbs hung from the beams, sage, thyme, lavender, each tied with twine that had been reused so many times it felt softer than string had any right to be. A kettle hummed on the stove, nearly singing. Candles glowed like captured fireflies. And there at the wide oak table sat Myra. Myra was not Rowan's person. Rowan did not belong to anyone. But if the world insisted on categories, Myra was the human who lived here, who had learned early on that Rowan preferred his milk warmed, his silence respected, and his opinions taken seriously. Tonight, she wore a thick wool sweater patched at the elbows and had ink smudged on her fingers, evidence of lists written and rewritten. Rowan leapt onto the chair beside her, then onto the table itself, because this was important, and sniffed at the scraps laid out. Bread heels, apple peels, a bowl of cream meant for tomorrow morning. He approved. "Is it almost time?" Myra murmured as if Rowan had asked. Rowan blinked slowly, which was the only answer needed. The clock by the door ticked with an earnestness that suggested it believed time was something that could be managed if one just paid enough attention. Rowan had lived with clocks long enough to know better. Still, he watched its hands inch forward, feeling the peculiar hum beneath his whiskers that always came before a year ended. Outside, the bramblewood shifted. It was subtle, no snapping branches or dramatic gusts, but Rowan's paws tingled. The paths between trees grew slightly longer, slightly shorter, rearranging themselves the way dreams do when you try to remember them. Creatures tucked themselves into burrows. Old leaves let go of their stems. Somewhere far off, an owl announced midnight practice, early and proud. Myra rose and opened the back door, letting in a breath of winter air sharp enough to wake the soul. She set a small bowl on the step, milk with a drizzle of honey, a tradition older than her memory, and whispered a thank you to the night. Rowan followed her gaze into the dark. This was his hour. He slipped past her legs and onto the threshold, fur bristling not with fear but with purpose. Every New Year's turning asked something of him, not loudly, not in words, but Rowan had learned to listen for the ask beneath the silence. Tonight it came as a feeling of unfinished threads. He padded down the path, frost crunching softly under his paws, and paused at the old apple tree where ribbons from past years still fluttered, faded but faithful. Each ribbon marked a promise made, a grief set down, a hope folded carefully and tucked into time. Rowan sniffed them, cataloging the stories they held. Some were done. Some were waiting. Behind him, the cottage clock began its count. 10. 9. Rowan lifted his head. The stars seemed closer now, as if leaning in. 8. The bramblewood exhaled. A fox watched from the shadows, eyes bright, tail still. 7. Rowan stepped off the path. 6. The snow deepened without falling, like a thought growing heavier. 5. He felt it then, the place where the old year thinned, where a careful paw could press through and find what had been left behind. Regrets, lost buttons, words never spoken aloud. 4. Rowan's whiskers brushed something invisible but solid, like a curtain woven of breath. 3. From the cottage, Myra's voice counted softly, hopeful and tired all at once. 2. Rowan hesitated just for a heartbeat. He thought of warm hearths, of sunlit naps, of mornings yet to come. 1. The world turned. Rowan stepped forward, and the night folded around him, gentle as a blanket, carrying him toward a place between moments, a place where endings waited patiently to become beginnings, and where a cat, very old and very small, still had work to do. And somewhere just beyond the frost-laced dark, something stirred, as if it had been waiting for him all along. The place between moments did not look like much at first. Rowan found himself standing on a stretch of ground that felt neither cold nor warm, neither solid nor soft. It was the color of moonlight caught in wool, dim and comforting. The sky above was not a sky at all, but a gentle swirl of grays and silvers, like steam rising from a cup left unattended. Sound existed here only if you listened for it. Rowan listened. There, beneath the hush, was the sound of a thread being pulled too tight. He followed it. His paws made no prints, yet he could feel each step settle into place behind him, as if the path approved of his direction. Shapes drifted at the edges of his vision, a teacup with a cracked handle, a single mitten, a folded note that smelled faintly of rosemary. These were the small, forgotten things of the old year, the ones humans rarely noticed but which cats understood were heavy with meaning. Rowan paused beside the mitten and nudged it with his nose. It warmed slightly, as though remembering a hand. Satisfied, he moved on. The thread's tension grew stronger, tugging gently at the space between his ears. It led him to a low stone wall that had not been there a moment before. Walls were like that here, appearing when needed, vanishing when their job was done. Rowan leapt onto it with practiced grace and looked down. On the other side sat a door. It was not attached to anything. No hinges, no frame, just a door standing politely in the mist. Its paint was chipped cottage blue, the sort that had seen many summers, and a wreath of dried herbs hung from its knob, bound with twine and intention. Rowan's tail flicked once. He knew this door. Every year had one. Sometimes it opened easily, sometimes it stuck. Sometimes it opened onto joy, sometimes onto sorrow that needed tending. Rowan did not choose what lay beyond. He only chose whether to enter. Behind him, faint and far away, the cottage clock finished its last chime and fell silent. The new year was officially underway. That meant the door would not wait forever. Rowan stepped closer. Before he could touch it, the door sighed and opened on its own. Warmth spilled out, not heat exactly, but the feeling of coming home after a long walk, boots damp, heart full. Rowan crossed the threshold and found himself in a narrow lane lined with cottages much like Myra's, each one glowing softly from within. Snow lay thick on the roofs. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys. Bells hung from doorways but did not ring. This was a village of almosts. Almost finished quilts, almost sent letters, almost forgotten dreams. Rowan trotted forward, ears swiveling as whispers brushed past him. They were not voices so much as impressions. I meant to try. I should have stayed. Next year, maybe. Next year is now, Rowan murmured in the language of cats, which is made mostly of understanding. At the center of the lane stood a well, old stones worn smooth by time and hope. A bucket rested beside it, empty. Rowan peered down into the well and saw reflections instead of water, moments replaying themselves softly, without sharp edges. Myra laughing in the summer garden. Myra crying quietly over a burnt loaf of bread. Myra staring out the window on nights when the wind felt too big. The thread pulled again. Rowan turned and saw a flicker of movement near one of the cottages, a door half open, light dimmer than the others. Something was wrong there. Not broken, just neglected. He approached slowly. The cottage smelled of dust and old paper. Inside, a small room held a table, a chair, and a pile of unfinished things. A scarf only half knitted, its yarn tangled. A journal with blank pages after the first few hopeful entries. A tiny clay bowl that had collapsed inward while drying. Rowan jumped onto the table and sat among them, tail wrapped neatly around his paws. This was the work, then. He reached out with one paw and pressed it gently into the tangled yarn. The knot loosened just a little. He sniffed the journal. The pages fluttered, filling themselves with faint lines, not words yet, just the promise of them. He nudged the clay bowl and it rounded out, imperfect but whole. Outside, the village brightened almost imperceptibly. Rowan felt the thread slacken, satisfied for now. But not finished. A soft sound reached him then, a bell not from the village but from farther away, thinner and more urgent. Rowan's ears pricked. That bell did not belong here. It belonged to the waking world. Myra. He could feel her stirring, rising from her chair, stepping outside to check the sky as she always did at midnight, just to be sure it was still there. She would notice his absence soon. She always did. Rowan hopped down from the table and padded back toward the door, but before he could leave, something shifted behind him. A shadow gathered itself near the hearth, not dark exactly, just undefined. It smelled like rain that never fell. "Stay," it seemed to say without words. "There is more." Rowan sat. He was patient. He had learned patience from windowsills and winters and waiting for milk to cool. He would stay a moment longer. The shadow took shape slowly, resolving into something small and hunched, a creature made of leftover time, of days that had slipped through fingers unnoticed. Its eyes were bright with worry. Rowan met its gaze, calm and unafraid. Outside the cottage, the bell rang again, sharper now. Rowan's whiskers trembled. There was still so much to tend, so many threads to ease, but the night was moving on, and the space between moments would not hold forever. He rose, taking one careful step toward the door, then paused, glancing back at the creature by the hearth, who watched him with a hope it did not know how to name. Rowan breathed in, steady and sure, and made his choice. But the consequences of it, the way the village would change, and what would follow him back through the door into the new year, had only just begun to reveal themselves. Rowan did not rush his choice. He had learned over many winters and many turnings that haste was a human habit. Cats understood that the world revealed itself best when given room to breathe. So he stood there in the dim cottage of almosts, tail tip swaying once, twice, while the bell from the waking world rang again, closer now, threaded with Myra's concern. The small, hunched creature by the hearth shifted. Up close, Rowan could see that it was stitched together from soft failures and gentle neglects. Its shape wavered, edges blurring and sharpening as if unsure which version of itself was allowed to exist. It held something tight against its chest, a key, old and tarnished, its teeth worn down by indecision. "You've been holding this too long," Rowan said, not unkindly. The creature flinched, then relaxed. It shuffled forward and placed the key on the floor between them. The metal chimed faintly, a sound like a spoon touching a teacup. Rowan sniffed it. This was a key to nothing specific and everything at once: the courage to begin, the permission to try badly, the willingness to leave a light on even when no one was expected home. Humans misplaced keys like this all the time. Cats, naturally, collected them. Rowan tapped the key with his paw. The cottage sighed, walls softening, light warming. Outside, the village of almost shifted again. Some doors closed gently, their work complete. Others opened wider, welcoming the new year in with tentative hope. The bell rang a third time. Rowan lifted his head, feeling the pull now, not urgent but insistent. The space between moments was thinning. Soon, it would fold back into ordinary time, and anything left undone would have to wait another year. He looked back at the creature. "Come," Rowan said. The creature hesitated, then nodded, if that motion could be called a nod, and followed him to the door. As Rowan stepped through, the village blurred, cottages dissolving into mist, ribbons of memory curling inward. The door closed behind them with a soft click, not locking, merely resting. They emerged not into the lane but into a field. Snow lay smooth and untouched, reflecting starlight so brightly it felt like standing inside a lantern. At the center of the field grew a single oak tree, ancient and wide, its branches bare but sturdy, each limb etched with years of weather and waiting. Rowan approached the tree and sat at its roots. This was where things were planted. He nosed the key toward the creature, who stared at it as if seeing it for the first time. Slowly, reverently, the creature pressed the key into the snow at the base of the oak. The ground softened, accepting it. Where the key disappeared, a small green shoot pushed upward, leaves curled tight against the cold. Not everything needed to bloom immediately. Rowan felt the shift then, the unmistakable tug of return. His paws tingled, fur humming with the pull of hearth and home. The creature began to fade, its outline growing transparent, worry loosening its grip. "Will I be all right?" it asked, finally finding words. Rowan blinked slowly. "You already are," he replied. With that, the field folded inward, snow lifting like a curtain, stars dimming to embers. The oak grew distant, then smaller, then became only a feeling, steadfast, waiting. The world turned again, gently this time. Rowan landed lightly on the frost-hardened earth just beyond the apple tree. The bramblewood settled back into its familiar shapes, paths sighing into place. The ribbons on the branches fluttered once, as if greeting him home. From the cottage came the soft creak of the door opening. "Rowan," Myra called, her voice threaded with relief. She stood wrapped in her coat, hair loose, breath puffing white in the cold. "There you are." Rowan trotted toward her, unhurried, the way one does when everything is exactly as it should be. He brushed against her legs, leaving behind a faint echo of oak and snow, and almost made whole. Inside, the hearth glowed brighter than before. The kettle clicked off, finished singing. Myra poured her tea and sat by the fire, Rowan leaping into her lap as if he had never left. She stroked his fur, slower than usual, as though she sensed something tender passing through him. "New year," she murmured. "I don't know what it'll bring." Rowan purred, deep and steady. Outside, the apple tree creaked softly, roots settling. Somewhere unseen, a green shoot pressed upward through cold earth, and beneath Rowan's ribs, where old magic liked to curl up and sleep, the thread of the year stretched onward, loose in places, taut in others, leading him gently forward into whatever the night had not yet revealed. Rowan dreamed before sleep fully claimed him. It was not the sort of dream humans had, full of jumbling images and restless turning. A cat's dream moved like a slow river, carrying meaning rather than noise. He dreamed of warmth first, the hearth breathing in and out, Myra's steady hand rising and falling with his purr. Then the dream widened, as dreams sometimes do, and let the night back in. Snow whispered against the windows. Outside, the new year stretched its limbs. Rowan's ears twitched. Even in sleep, he was listening. He felt the hum again, not as sharp as the turning, but present, like a string tuned just enough to sing if touched. This was how the year spoke now, not in thresholds but in quiet invitations. He opened one eye. The cottage had settled into its midnight posture. Candles burned low, wax pooling like pale moons. Myra had dozed in her chair, chin tucked into her scarf, breath slow and even. Rowan shifted carefully, easing himself from her lap without waking her. He landed soundlessly on the rug and padded toward the window. The bramblewood was awake. Not loudly, never loudly, but alert. Frost gleamed along the hedges, catching starlight. The apple tree stood calm and rooted, ribbons stirring only when the wind thought to pass through. And beyond it all, deeper in the trees, something glimmered faintly, like foxfire or a thought not yet finished. Rowan hopped onto the sill. He remembered then the key pressed into snow, the green shoot brave enough to begin in winter. Beginnings were fragile things. They needed watching. Sometimes they needed guarding. The hum deepened. Rowan slipped out through the cat door and into the cold, his fur fluffing instinctively. The night greeted him like an old friend who did not ask questions. His breath clouded the air as he followed the pull, pause finding the path even where none appeared to exist. At the edge of the bramblewood, he paused. This was where ordinary woods ended and something older began. The trees here leaned closer together, trunks twisted in ways that suggested they had grown around stories rather than sunlight. Rowan sat back on his haunches and waited. Waiting, too, was a kind of work. Eventually, a figure emerged from between the trees, not walking so much as arriving. It was tall and thin and wrapped in layers of fabric that shifted colors like dusk caught in motion. Its face was kind in the way weather was kind, impartial, enduring. "Good evening, keeper," the figure said. Rowan inclined his head. "I wondered when you would notice," he replied. The figure smiled or did something close to it. The turn was noticeable this year. "Yes," Rowan agreed. "There were many almosts." "And now?" Rowan looked back toward the cottage, where Myra slept by the fire, unaware of how carefully her life had been nudged into place. He thought of the village fatting, of the creature made of leftover time, of the shoot beneath the oak. "Now there are beginnings," he said, "which are more troublesome." The figure laughed softly, a sound like leaves brushing stone. "You always say that." Rowan's tail flicked, "because it is always true." They stood together for a while, watching the woods breathe. Somewhere a mouse scurried, safe for now. Somewhere else a dream shifted direction, choosing a braver ending. "There is something else," the figure said at last, "something new." Rowan felt it immediately, a thread he had not noticed before, finer than the rest, humming with unfamiliar weight. It did not pull toward the village of almosts, nor toward the oak. It led elsewhere. Rowan's whiskers angled forward. "Show me." The figure gestured, and the trees parted just enough to reveal a narrow path dusted with frost. It wound downward, away from the familiar woods, toward a place where the air felt denser, richer, threaded with scents of soil and ink and old rain. Rowan stepped onto the path. Behind him the cottage stood steady, hearth glowing, Myra dreaming peacefully. He did not worry. He never worried. What was meant to remain would remain. The path curved, and with each step, Rowan felt the year settling around him, knitting itself tighter. This was not a place between moments. This was the year itself, just beginning to wake. Far ahead a light flickered, not warm like a hearth, not bright like stars, but steady, persistent. Something was waiting there, something that had not existed before this turning, something unfinished in an entirely new way. Rowan moved forward, paws silent, heart calm. And as the frost thickened beneath his feet, and the woods leaned in to listen, the thread of the new year drew him onward, toward a story that had only just begun to clear its throat. The light ahead did not grow brighter as Rowan approached. Instead, it grew deeper, as though it were not something shining outward, but something inviting him inward. It hovered low to the ground, nestled between the roots of an old beech tree whose bark bore the faint scars of initials carved long ago and nearly healed over. The air here felt heavier, scented with damp earth and something metallic, like rain about to fall. Rowan slowed. This was not caution, this was respect. He circled the light once, twice, reading it the way cats read rooms and moods and people, by what was not immediately offered. The light pulsed gently, not demanding attention, merely existing. It was young, very young, and yet it carried a weight that pressed softly against Rowan's chest. A beginning without a name. Rowan sat and wrapped his tail around his paws. "You are early," he said. The light flickered, embarrassed perhaps, or uncertain. It shifted shape slightly, elongating, then settling back into itself. When it responded, it did not use words. Instead, Rowan felt a memory brush against his thoughts. Myra at her table, staring at a blank page long after the fire had burned low. A half-formed idea abandoned because it felt too large, too fragile, too easy to break. Rowan exhaled. "So," he murmured, "that's what you are." The forest leaned closer. The beech tree's roots creaked faintly, adjusting themselves as if to make space. Snow began to fall, not thick, not fast, but deliberate, each flake taking its time. Rowan held still while the light wavered again, gathering itself with visible effort. It wanted to move. Rowan rose. He stepped closer and extended one paw, not touching, not yet, but close enough for warmth to matter. The light responded, drifting toward him until it hovered just above his paw pads, humming softly. "Careful," Rowan warned gently. "The world is not always kind to things like you." The light dimmed, then brightened again, stubborn. Rowan allowed himself the faintest smile. "Very well." He lowered his paw, and the light settled against it like a moth choosing a sleeve. It was warmer than expected, alive in a way that made Rowan's whiskers twitch. From behind him, the tall figure stepped quietly onto the path. "You found it then," the figure said. Rowan did not turn. "It found me." The figure nodded. It wasn't meant to awaken yet, not until spring. Rowan flicked an ear. Spring doesn't ask permission. The light pulsed approvingly. The figure folded their hands into their sleeves. "You know what this means?" "Yes," Rowan said. "It means I'll be busy." The forest seemed to sigh. Rowan began to walk, slow and measured, the light padding along beside him now rather than resting on his paw. It stayed close, careful not to stray too far from his presence. The path beneath their feet shifted subtly, smoothing where needed, narrowing where focus was required. They traveled in companionable silence for a time. Then the ground changed. The frost thinned, replaced by damp soil and scattered leaves. The trees here were younger, their branches less twisted, their trunks straighter. This part of the forest smelled of ink and wool and old books left open too long. Rowan recognized the signs immediately. Human places were nearby. The light faltered. Rowan paused and looked down at it. "Yes," he said quietly, "this is where you belong." The light dimmed, frightened now. Rowan could feel its hesitation, its fear of being seen, judged, mishandled. Humans were careless with beginnings, not out of malice but eagerness. Rowan sat again, positioning himself between the light and the thinning trees. "I will not leave you," he promised. "Not yet." The light brightened, relieved. From the distance came a sound, not the bell this time, but laughter. Soft, human. Someone walking home late, boots crunching over frost, breath visible in the cold. Rowan listened, committing the sound to memory. This was the rhythm of the year now, intersections, near misses, quiet convergences. The tall figure lingered at the edge of the trees. "I cannot follow you farther," they said. "I know," Rowan replied. "But you will call," the figure added, "if it grows too heavy." Rowan did not answer, which was answer enough. The figure faded back into the forest, leaving behind only the faintest scent of rain. Rowan turned his attention fully to the light. "Come," he said again. They moved off the path and into a shallow hollow where the earth dipped protectively inward. Rowan scratched at the soil with deliberate care, creating a small nest among roots and leaves. The light hovered uncertainly, then settled into the hollow, glow softening. Rowan curled around it. Above them, the snow continued to fall, each flake landing with purpose, insulating the ground, hiding what needed hiding. Rowan tucked his nose beneath his tail and listened, not just to the forest, but to the year itself as it learned how to breathe. Somewhere far away, Myra stirred in her sleep and dreamed of writing something she could not yet name. Rowan purred. The light pulsed in time with his breath. And though the night deepened and the woods shifted, and the unseen threads of the year continued to weave themselves into patterns too large to see all at once, Rowan remained there, keeping watch, knowing, as he always had, that this was only the beginning of what the new year would ask of him. Rowan stayed curled around the light as the night wore on. Time moved differently here, slowed by roots and snow and intention. The forest no longer leaned in to listen. It had settled, satisfied that what needed tending was being tended. The light slept, or something like sleep, its glow dimming and brightening in small, steady rhythms that reminded Rowan of a hearth settling into embers. He remained awake. Keeping watch did not require movement. It required presence. Rowan let his breathing deepen, his purr drop into a lower register that resonated through the hollow and into the soil beneath. The ground responded, subtle and patient. Seeds far below adjusted themselves. Worms paused. The world took note. Eventually, the snow stopped falling. The silence afterward was profound. Rowan lifted his head slightly, ears swiveling. Dawn was still a long way off, but the night had shifted. The deep hours were passing. Soon, the world would begin its quiet preparations for morning, frost tightening, birds stirring in their dreams, humans turning over in their beds. The light stirred. It lifted itself from the hollow, glow strengthening, edges sharpening as awareness returned. It drifted upward, circled Rowan once, then hovered in front of his face, inquisitive. "Yes," Rowan said softly, "I'm still here." The light pulsed, then flickered uneasily. Through it came impressions again, clearer now. hands hesitating over paper, a voice caught in the throat, a choice delayed not from fear but from wanting things to be right. Rowan considered this. Perfection is a trap, he said gently but firmly. You will learn that, humans often do. The light wavered, absorbing the lesson as best it could. Rowan rose and stretched, joints popping quietly. He shook snow from his fur and stepped out of the hollow, glancing back to be sure the light followed. It did, keeping close, drifting at shoulder height like a loyal, uncertain moon. They could not stay here forever. The hollow was safe, but safety alone did not teach beginnings how to grow strong. At some point, they had to be carried closer to the world that would shape them. Rowan padded forward, choosing his path with care. They moved through thinning trees and onto softer ground where the forest gave way to meadow. The sky above had begun to pale, not yet pink or gold, but lighter, like paper held up to candlelight. Rowan paused at the edge of the meadow, assessing. Beyond it lay the village. Not the village of almosts, that place had folded itself away with the turning, but the waking one. Stone cottages, narrow lanes, gardens sleeping beneath frost. Smoke already curled from one chimney, someone awake early, perhaps unable to sleep with the new year pressing so insistently at their thoughts. The light drifted closer to Rowan, nervous again. Yes, he said, people. The light pulsed uncertainly. They will not all understand you, Rowan continued. Some will overlook you, some will mishandle you, but one of them. He glanced toward the familiar rise where Myra's cottage sat, barely visible through hedges and trees. One of them already knows you're coming, even if she doesn't know she knows. The light brightened, hope flickering through its glow. Rowan began crossing the meadow. Frost clung to the grass, sparkling faintly as the sky lightened. Each step Rowan took seemed to quiet the world around him, as though the morning itself was holding still to watch. The light followed faithfully, casting a soft sheen over the frost where it passed. Halfway across, Rowan stopped. His ears flattened. Something was wrong. Not dangerous, nothing sharp or predatory, but off. A tug at the edge of his awareness, like a thread snagging on a rough nail. Rowan turned slowly, scanning the meadow. There, near the stone wall at the meadow's edge, something hunched low, wrapped in shadow thicker than the rest of the night. It did not glow. It did not hum. It absorbed light instead, drawing it inward. The light beside Rowan dimmed instinctively. Rowan stepped forward, placing himself squarely between the shadow and the beginning he guarded. Enough, he said. The shadow shifted, uneasy. It did not approach, but neither did it retreat. From it came a familiar sensation, doubt, not the gentle kind that encourages reflection, but the heavy kind that convinces beginnings they are mistakes. Rowan's tail lashed once. You do not belong here, he said calmly. The shadow rippled, as if offended. It pressed closer to the ground, spreading just slightly. Rowan felt the year respond. Threads tightened, not in alarm yet, but in attention. Rowan stood his ground. He had faced such things before. They always appeared early in the year, hopping to catch beginnings before they learned how to stand. They thrived on quiet discouragement, on sighs and shrugs and maybe later. Rowan arched his back, fur lifting, presence expanding far beyond his small, sturdy body. This one is spoken for, he said. The light brightened behind him, bolstered. The shadow wavered, thinning at the edges. It lingered a moment longer, testing his resolve, then began to pull itself back toward the wall, dissolving into ordinary darkness as the first true hint of dawn touched the horizon. Rowan did not move until it was gone. Only then did he relax, fur settling. The light circled him, gratitude spilling through its glow. "Yes," Rowan said, voice softer now. "That will not be the last time." He resumed walking. As they neared the village, the world grew louder in small ways. A door opening, a kettle set to boil, the faint creak of a cartwheel. Life beginning again, ordinary and miraculous all at once. Rowan slipped through familiar hedges and along known paths, guiding the light carefully, shielding it from sharp corners and careless glances. He paused once more at the edge of Myra's garden. The apple tree stood quiet, ribbons still, bark dusted with frost. Beneath it, unseen, the shoot beneath the oak dreamed of leaves it had not yet grown. Rowan sat and considered. He could not bring the light inside. Not yet. Beginnings needed invitation as much as protection. They could not be forced into hearths, no matter how warm. The light hovered, uncertain but trusting. Rowan looked toward the cottage window, where dawn now painted the glass in pale blue. Inside, Myra stirred, waking slowly, thoughts already drifting toward that blank page waiting on her table. "Soon," Rowan promised. He curled his tail around the light one last time, steadying it, grounding it, preparing it for the moment when it would be noticed, not as a glow or a hum, but as a sudden, quiet certainty that now was the time to begin. The year breathed in. And Rowan, keeper of thresholds and watcher of fragile things, settled in to wait for what the morning would bring. Morning arrived the way it always did, softly, as if unsure it was welcome. The sky lightened by degrees, frost loosening its grip on the world grain by grain. Somewhere nearby, a robin tried out a note, decided it wasn't quite right, and tried again. Rowan remained in the garden, sitting like a small, deliberate statue beneath the apple tree, the light hovering close at his side. The light was changing. Not growing brighter exactly, but steadier. Its glow no longer wavered with every distant sound or passing shadow. It had learned something during the night, perhaps from the oak, or the hollow, or Rowan's quiet refusal to move when doubt had crept close. It now pulsed with a rhythm that felt chosen. Rowan approved. Inside the cottage, Myra woke fully. Rowan sensed it before he heard it, the subtle shift in the air when a human transitions from sleeping to thinking. The weight of possibility settled around her like a shawl she did not yet realize she had picked up. Rowan's ears angled toward the door as footsteps crossed the floor, slow and unhurried. The kettle was set on the stove. Rowan allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The light drifted closer to the cottage, drawn by something it could not yet name. Rowan gently stepped in front of it, blocking its path. "Patience," he said. The light dimmed slightly, chastened. "This part matters." He rose and padded toward the apple tree, leaping lightly onto one of its lower branches. The ribbons tied there fluttered faintly in the morning breeze. Rowan sniffed them one by one, reading the years woven into their frayed edges. Courage asked for, grief released, joy dared. One ribbon in particular caught his attention. It was newer than the others, its color still rich, a deep green shot through with gold thread. Rowan nosed it gently. The ribbon trembled, then settled. "Yes," Rowan murmured, "you'll do." He hopped back down and flicked his tail toward the light, beckoning it closer. It drifted obediently to the ribbon, circling it in curiosity. "This," Rowan explained, "is how you cross." He brushed the ribbon with his whiskers. The ribbon shimmered, not visibly, not in any way a human eye would catch, but the air around it grew warmer, more attentive. It was no longer just cloth. It was a marker, a bridge, a quiet agreement between years. The light leaned toward it, hesitated, then pressed close. Nothing dramatic happened, which was exactly right. The light did not flare or vanish. Instead, it softened, thinning until it was no longer a glow but a feeling, a certainty resting lightly against the ribbon, waiting. Rowan stepped back. "There," he said, "now you can be found." The cottage door opened. Myra stepped out into the garden, wrapped in her sweater, hair still tangled from sleep. She inhaled deeply, eyes half closed as if testing the morning. Her gaze drifted to the apple tree, lingering there for a moment longer than usual. She frowned just slightly. "That's odd," she murmured. Rowan remained perfectly still. Humans notice things best when they thought they had done so on their own. Myra reached out and touched the ribbon. Her fingers paused, then tightened. Something shifted behind her eyes, a flicker of recognition without memory. "I should," she began, then laughed softly at herself. "Well, later." She went back inside. The light, now quiet, patient, settled fully into the ribbon, its presence no longer separate from the world. It was no longer something that needed guarding every second. It had roots now, however shallow. Rowan exhaled. But his work was not done. The hum returned, subtle but persistent. Not alarm, not urgency, something like summons. Rowan turned his gaze toward the far edge of the meadow, where the stone wall met the woods. The shadow from earlier was gone, but in its place lingered a faint residue, like cold where warmth had recently been. Doubt rarely traveled alone. Rowan padded toward the wall, following the hum. As he approached, he noticed small disturbances along the ground, tiny places where frost had melted too quickly, where grass lay flattened without cause, signs of something passing through without fully belonging. At the wall, Rowan leapt up and balanced easily, tail held low for counterweight. From here, he could see both worlds at once, the waking village behind him and the deeper woods ahead. Between them, something stirred. It was not the shadow from before. This presence felt sharper, more angular. Where doubt seeped, this cut. Rowan narrowed his eyes. "Well," he said quietly, "you're new." The air shivered in response. A shape began to resolve, tall, thin, edges too precise for comfort. It did not hide itself, perhaps believing it did not need to. It smelled of rules mistaken for truths, of endings declared too early. "You interfere," it said, voice crisp and clean and utterly without warmth. Rowan sat. "I tend," he corrected. The presence tilted its head, assessing him. "Beginnings create imbalance." Rowan's tail tip twitched. "Beginnings create movement." The presence stepped closer, frost crackling beneath its feet. "This year will be heavy," it warned. "Not all things should be encouraged to grow." Rowan hopped down from the wall and planted himself firmly on the ground. "Then they will need watching," he said, "which is what I do." For a long moment, neither moved. Then, from the village behind Rowan, came the sound of Myra opening a window. Fresh air rushed in, carrying with it the smell of tea and ink and something fragile but determined. The presence faltered just slightly. Rowan felt the threads of the year tighten, not in fear but in readiness. "You may pass," the presence said at last, though its tone suggested this was temporary. "But I will be watching." "As will I," Rowan replied. The presence receded, dissolving into the morning mist, leaving the world a fraction lighter than before. Rowan stood still for several breaths, ensuring it was truly gone. Then he turned back toward the cottage. The ribbon on the apple tree stirred, catching the light of the rising sun. Inside, Myra sat at her table, pen poised over a blank page, heart beating just a little faster than usual. Rowan padded home, readying himself. The year had begun to show its teeth and its tenderness. And somewhere between the two, Rowan would walk, as he always did, listening for the next quiet place where something fragile needed to be kept safe just a little while longer. Rowan slipped back into the cottage just as the sun crested the hedgerow, its light pale and tentative, as though the day itself were unsure how boldly it should begin. The cat door whispered shut behind him. Warmth gathered immediately around his paws, the familiar scent of bread dough and tea leaves wrapping him in reassurance. Myra sat at the table, just as he had sensed she would. The pen hovered above the page, unmoving. Steam curled from her mug in thin, thoughtful spirals. She was not stuck, not exactly. Rowan knew the difference. This was the delicate moment before beginning, when all possibilities still existed at once, and choosing one felt like a small grief. Rowan leapt onto the table. Myra startled, then smiled. "You're very opinionated this morning," she said, reaching out to scratch beneath his chin. Rowan accepted the scratch, then deliberately stepped across the page, tail swishing ink dangerously close to the margin. "Hey," Myra laughed, gently nudging him aside. All right, I get it." She put pen to paper. The first line was not good. Rowan could tell immediately. It was stiff, careful in the wrong way. Myra frowned, then crossed it out. Rowan settled beside the page and began to wash one paw loudly. The second line was better. Outside, the ribbon on the apple tree stirred, responding not to wind but to intention. The feeling tucked within it, no longer light, no longer separate, pressed gently forward, easing into the world through Myra's hand, through ink and breath and willingness. Rowan purred. The sound was not loud, but it carried. The cottage responded in small ways. The kettle clicked as it cooled. The hearth sighed and shifted. The herbs hanging from the beams rustled faintly, releasing their scent. This was how places acknowledged when something had begun properly. Myra wrote another line. Then another. Her shoulders relaxed. The pen moved more freely now, skimming rather than pressing. Whatever she was writing, it was no longer being forced. It was being followed. Rowan watched, half-lidded but alert. This was one of the moments he guarded most carefully, not because it was fragile but because it was powerful. Beginnings, once accepted, could change the shape of days. The hum softened. Not gone, never gone, but less insistent. The year had taken its first real step. Rowan hopped down and padded toward the window, hopping onto the sill to survey the world outside. The meadow glittered faintly as frost retreated. The stone wall stood quiet, no sign of the sharp-edged presence lingering now. For the moment, balance held. But the year was long. Rowan knew better than to believe that one successful morning meant smooth passage ahead. There would be other beginnings, other almosts, other shadows wearing different names. As if summoned by the thought, a ripple passed through the bramblewood. Rowan's ears pricked. There, deep among the trees, something had shifted. Not a threat, not yet. More like a door being tested gently, just to see if it might open. Rowan's tail flicked once. Behind him, Myra paused in her writing and looked up, a strange expression crossing her face. "I should check the old path today," she murmured to herself. "I don't know why." Rowan did not look away from the trees. Yes, he thought, you should. The forest leaned, attentive once more. Whatever waited there had not crossed into the year yet, but it was close. Close enough that Rowan could feel the faint tension in the threads, the subtle tightening that meant something new was preparing to make itself known. Rowan remained on the sill, still as stone, watching the woods breathe. The morning unfolded carefully around him, unaware of how narrowly it was being kept gentle. And somewhere just beyond the bramblewood, unseen but unmistakably present, the year cleared its throat again, preparing to ask for something more. Rowan did not move from the windowsill for a long while. He watched the bramblewood the way one watches a sleeping child, aware that sleep is not stillness, that much happens beneath closed eyes. The ripple he had sensed did not repeat itself, but its absence felt intentional, like breath being held. Inside, Myra wrote. The scratch of pen on paper became a rhythm all its own, joining the soft ticking of the clock and the occasional pop from the hearth. Rowan let those sounds anchor him. Ordinary sounds mattered. They were the weights that kept the world from drifting too far in any one direction. At last, Myra leaned back in her chair and sighed, not tired, not frustrated, but surprised. Well, she said to no one in particular, that wasn't what I meant to write. Rowan's whiskers twitched. She read back over the page, lips moving silently, then nodded once, as if agreeing to terms she had not known she was negotiating. She closed the notebook gently, like one does when something inside might startle if handled too roughly. Later, she said again, but this time the word sounded less like delay and more like promise. Rowan hopped down. He circled her ankles once, twice, then padded toward the back door and sat, expectant. Myra raised an eyebrow. You too? She asked, amused. All right, I was thinking of a walk anyway. She pulled on boots and a coat, scarf looping carelessly around her neck. When she opened the door, the morning rushed in, cold, bright, alive. Rowan darted past her legs and into the garden, pausing just long enough to sniff the air. The ribbon on the apple tree fluttered as they passed. Myra noticed it again. That ribbon wasn't there last year, she murmured. Rowan's tail flicked. No, he thought, it was. They followed the narrow path past the hedge and into the meadow. Frost still clung stubbornly in places, but the sun was gaining confidence now, its light warming the earth in patches. Rowan trotted ahead, occasionally stopping to sniff at something only he could sense. The old path Myra had mentioned wound along the meadow's edge, skirting the bramblewood. It was not used often. Grass grew longer there, and stones lay half-buried, shaped smooth by decades of weather and wandering feet. Myra hesitated at its entrance. I haven't walked this way in ages, she said. I wonder why it feels important today. Rowan glanced back at her, green eyes steady. She followed. The forest greeted them differently than it had greeted Rowan alone. Branches creaked softly, adjusting. Birds fell quiet, not in fear, but in attention. Rowan walked close to Myra's boots now, his presence grounding her steps, keeping her from straying too far to the left or right. They came to a small clearing where the earth dipped slightly, ringed by young trees. In the center lay something half hidden beneath leaves and frost. A stone marker, no taller than a kneeling child, its surface worn nearly smooth. Myra knelt. Oh, she breathed, I'd forgotten this was here. She brushed the stone with her glove, clearing leaves away. No words were carved into it anymore if there ever had been. Time had claimed them, but the shape remained, deliberate and patient. Rowan sat beside her. This place remembered things. Myra rested her hand on the stone, eyes unfocused. Thoughts drifted through her, old plans, paths not taken, choices made because they seemed sensible at the time. There was no regret here, not really. Just curiosity, a wondering at the many selves she might have been. Rowan felt the hum again. Stronger now. From the edge of the clearing, the air shifted. Rowan's ears flattened slightly, not in alarm but in readiness. The presence that emerged was not sharp like the one before. This one was quieter, heavier, cloaked in familiarity. It smelled of long habits and inherited fears. It did not fully appear. It never did. Instead, it pressed gently at the edges of thought, offering comfort in exchange for stillness. "Stay as you are," it whispered without sound. "There is safety in what you know." Myra shivered. "I don't know why," she said softly, "but I feel like if I don't come back here again soon, I'll miss something." Rowan stood. He placed one paw on the stone marker. The presence recoiled just slightly. It did not flee, it never fled, but it retreated enough for the air to lighten. Rowan met the unseen thing's pressure with calm certainty. "Not this one," he said silently. "Not today." The presence withdrew, folding itself back into the forest's deeper layers, content to wait. It always waited. Patience was its greatest strength and its greatest flaw. Myra exhaled. She stood slowly, brushing leaves from her coat. "I should mark this place," she said, "so I don't forget again." Rowan watched as she pulled a scrap of ribbon from her pocket, plain twine, really, and tied it loosely around a low branch at the clearing's edge. It was not the same as the ribbon on the apple tree. This one did not hum. It did not anchor beginnings. But it marked a tension. That would be enough for now. They turned back toward the meadow, footsteps lighter than before. Rowan glanced over his shoulder once, committing the clearing to memory. He would return here. He could feel it. This place would matter later, when the year asked harder questions. As they reached the hedge, Rowan felt it again. A tug, sharper this time, pulling not toward the woods but outward toward places unseen, unwalked. The year was stretching, testing its reach. Rowan paused at the threshold of the garden and looked out over the land, senses opening wide. Threads shimmered faintly in the air, some taut, some slack, some newly spun and trembling with potential. He stepped forward, already listening. Whatever the year was preparing to ask next had begun to gather itself, and Rowan intended to be there when it did. Rowan lingered at the garden's edge, long after Myra went back inside. She paused at the door as if expecting him to follow, then smiled when he did not. "All right," she said softly. "Take your time." The door closed with a familiar click. Rowan did not move. The morning had fully arrived now. Sunlight spilled across the meadow in slow, deliberate bands, warming stone and soil and the thin bones of winter grass. Somewhere farther off, a cart rattled along a distant road. The ordinary world had resumed its careful, clumsy motion. But underneath it all, the year shifted its weight. Rowan felt it like a pressure behind the eyes, like a change in weather that only old joints noticed first. He stepped forward, nose low, reading the air. Threads crossed here, so many of them now, newly spun, shimmering faintly when the light struck just right. Most would never matter. Some would matter immensely. Rowan chose one that hummed. It led not toward the woods this time, nor toward the village, but along the hedgerow and out across the fields, toward land that lay beyond the routines of daily walks. Rowan followed at an easy pace, unhurried but intent, paws moving with the confidence of one who knows the ground remembers him. The field sloped gently downward. Frost lingered in the hollows, silvering the shadows. As Rowan walked, the hum grew clearer, not louder but more distinct, like a melody separating itself from background noise. He reached a low stone fence and hopped onto it, balancing easily. From here, he could see farther than usual, a cluster of distant cottages, a narrow road, and beyond that, a stretch of land that had once been worked and then left alone. Abandoned places were rarely empty. Rowan's tail flicked as he jumped down and continued on. The air changed as he crossed the fence line. It grew quieter, thicker somehow, carrying the scent of old rain and rusted iron. The grass here lay flattened in strange patterns, not by wind but by memory, paths once walked often enough to leave an impression long after feet had stopped passing through. Rowan slowed. This place was listening. At the center of the field stood the remains of a small structure, a stone foundation no higher than Rowan's shoulders, its walls long since fallen inward. Ivy had claimed much of it, threading through cracks, softening edges. In one corner, a single beam leaned stubbornly upright, darkened with age. Rowan circled the ruins. The hum was strongest here. He sat, closed his eyes, and let the place speak. What came was not a vision, not words, but a layering of impressions. Laughter once loud enough to spill through open windows, arguments that ended in silence, hands that built and mended and eventually laid tools down for the last time. This had been a home, not recently, not gently ended. Rowan opened his eyes. Near the leaning beam, something stirred. It was small, smaller even than the light he had guarded earlier, but heavier, denser. It did not glow. It absorbed sound rather than light, creating a pocket of stillness around itself. It was curled in on itself, tight as a knot. Rowan approached cautiously. This was not a beginning. This was a remainder. "You've been here a long time," Rowan said quietly. The knot did not respond. Rowan sat and waited. Time passed. The sun climbed. The world moved on around the field, unaware of the conversation happening just beneath its notice. At last the knot shifted. A shape emerged, vague and trembling, like a memory unsure it was still allowed to exist. It smelled of endings, unfinished ones, abrupt ones, the kind that left rooms standing exactly as they were. "You're early," it whispered, echoing words Rowan himself had spoken not long ago. Rowan tilted his head. "Am I?" The shape wavered. "No one comes here anymore." "Places are not forgotten just because feet stop walking them," Rowan replied. The shape studied him, curiosity flickering through its uncertainty. "Are you here to finish it?" Rowan considered. "I'm here to see whether it needs finishing," he said at last. The shape sagged slightly, as if relieved by the answer. Around them the ruins sighed, a deep, settling sound, stones adjusting minutely, ivy rustling in acknowledgement. Rowan felt the year's threads tighten around this place, weaving it back into relevance. This, then, was what the hum had been calling him toward. Not a beginning. Not yet. Rowan curled his tail neatly around his paws and settled in, prepared to listen for as long as it took. Whatever story still lingered here had waited long enough, and Rowan had learned that the year, when it finally decided to speak, never did so without reason.